1 second. Okay. Ready?
Yep.
Good morning. I'm going to call this meeting to order. My name is Councilmember Zachary Parker, and I am chairing the subcommittee on libraries and youth affairs. Today's date is November 22nd, 2024, and the time is 11:33 a.m. Today's hearing on the performance processes and continuum of services at DYRS follows a roundtable the committee held on Monday of this week, where we heard from the agency. The committee's intention was to put the agency on the record first so that the committee and public witnesses could have time to digest and respond to the agency's assertions. The plan has worked, but only in part. We are still waiting on written responses to the majority of the pre-hearing questions that was sent over to the agency. Today, I'm looking forward to getting a wider range of perspectives, including from individuals and organizations that oversee DYRS, represent youth detained by the committee, committed to DYRS, or can shed light on the experiences of district youth who encounter our juvenile delinquency system. I plan to provide each witness with 5 minutes to provide an opening statement. The length of time for questions will depend on the number of my colleagues that are present. And with that, I'll call the first panel to testify. And that will include Mark Jordan, Executive Director of the Office of Independent Juvenile Justice Facilities Oversight, as well as Katerina Simonova, Special Counsel for Policy and Legislation with the Public Defender Services. As both of you are government officials, I'm going to ask that you both raise your right hand. And if you could repeat after me, I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you. Thank you. That is a custom of the council to swear in witnesses. And so, Mr. Jordan, I'm going to start with you, and you can begin.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Parker and members of the committee. My name is Mark Jordan, and I am the Executive Director of the Office of Independent Juvenile Justice Facilities Oversight. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today at this public roundtable. I had the opportunity to watch the oversight hearing that you conducted on Monday, and I understand that the scope of this roundtable is broader than the mandate of the OIJJFO, the purview of which is limited to DYRS's 2 secure facilities, the YSC and New Beginnings. Population levels at the YSC can have a significant impact on facility operations, including the provision of services to youth. As you know, since December 2023, the single cell capacity of the YSC is 98. As of this morning, the population of the facility was 100, 2 youth above capacity. This increase appears to be driven in part by an increase in admissions over the past 2 months relative to prior months, and an increase in the average length of stay among detained youth in particular. To provide some context on populations at the YSC, I've included with my testimony historical data on the YSC population from the day the facility opened approximately 20 years ago. As you will see, there was nearly a 6-year period between mid-2017 and March 2023 when the population of the facility hovered below approximately 60 youth. This afforded YSC managers a level of flexibility to separate populations and reduced staffing demands. That has changed as the population has increased. The YSC houses several distinct populations, which must be housed and participate in programs separately. For example, boys and girls, Title 16 youth, ideally detained and committed youth. With only 9 housing units, the pressure to separate youth within the facility when the population is high and the composition is changing can directly impact services. For example, recently, the population of the girls at the YSC increased above 11, the maximum that can be housed on a single housing unit. In early October, some girls were moved to the intake unit, and ultimately, in late October 2024, facility managers redesignated what was the orientation unit for newly admitted boys to a housing unit for girls. The consequences were immediate. Girls who were moved off of the unit no longer had access to daily school with a teacher, but rather received daily educational packets. Newly admitted boys, on the other hand, were sent directly to housing units for orientation, requiring temporary separation from the rest of the unit, temporary programs in smaller groups. These are specific examples of the challenges of operating and providing services at a facility near or above capacity. But it is not only population levels on any given day that impact the YSC, but the volume and pace of the flow of the youth through the facility. I have included with my testimony an analysis of YSC admissions from the recent 12-month period ending on October 31st. During the 12-month period, there were a total of 2,477 admissions to the YSC. Nearly 60% of that total consisted of overnights. So overall, 70% of admissions were released within 1 day of admission to the YSC. But if you exclude overnighters, that total number of admissions to the facility was 976 youth. Of that total, 34% were released in 1 day, and slightly over half were released within 1 week of admission. Nearly 80% of non-overnighter admitted youth were released within 30 days of admission. The significance of this phenomenon is that most youth admitted to the YSC are at the facility for a short time, but most youth housed at the YSC on any given day have longer lengths of stay. In other words, the latter group is not representative of most youth admitted to the YSC. Under the best of circumstances, services in the facility must take into account this constantly changing population. Medical and behavioral health staff must provide screenings and/or assessments to all youth who arrive, in most cases not knowing how long a youth will remain at the YSC. The composition of classrooms, which are defined by housing units, not grade levels, changes routinely, presenting challenges to teachers managing classroom dynamics and varying educational materials. When populations at the YSC are low, facility managers can more effectively mitigate the impact of this rapid population churn. For example, historically, newly arrived youth have been placed on a designated short-term orientation unit for an initial period of days. Many of the youth with short lengths of stay are released before placement on a housing unit. But as the population has risen recently, managers have lost that flexibility, and youth are housed directly on available cells throughout the facility. This can result in periods when units have to be divided into groups until staff can assess the newly admitted youth. New Beginnings offers a contrast to the YSC. I have included with my testimony an analysis of admissions to New Beginnings for the same 12-month period ending October 31st. Over that period, only 58 youth were admitted, 23 of whom already have been released, and 35 of whom remained at the facility as of November 12th. The program at New Beginnings is intended to have youth remain at the facility as they progress through a 6-level program over an indeterminate number of months. Because the facility houses only committed youth and those youth are transferred from the YSC, more is known about them prior to their placement at New Beginnings. And DYRS can control how long the youth will remain placed at the facility. So the agency is able to structure its program differently than at the YSC. In April 2024, DYRS opened a housing unit for girls at New Beginnings, which currently houses 4 girls. I previously provided, at the committee's request, data regarding staffing at the YSC and New Beginnings, which I would be pleased to discuss. I thank you again for this opportunity to testify today, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. And I do want to acknowledge that Brittany Mobley is also joining us here on the panel with the Juvenile Services Program with the Public Defender Services Office.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Katerina Semyonova, Special Counsel for Policy and Legislation at the Public Defender Service. With me today is Brittany Mobley, Juvenile Services Program Deputy Chief at PDS. JSP has provided support and legal assistance to youth since 1982 by staffing legal rights offices in the district's youth detention facilities. Staff at JSP, including lawyers and law clerks, have day-to-day interactions with youth and are able to help them with matters such as understanding their rights, filing grievances, and seeking help with matters that come up during the course of their detention. Over the last 2 years, JSP staff have seen youth complaints about the lack of rehabilitative programming increase exponentially. Youth often tell JSP staff that they spend a lot of time in their cells, lack quality programming, do not get enough gym or outside time, do not have real therapy, and wait far too long at YSC for placement. In fact, past and current YSC staff have also expressed major concerns about the long lengths of stay for youth awaiting placement and the lack of programming generally for all youth at YSC. These complaints by youth and DYRS staff square with what JSP has seen on a daily basis. DYRS is failing to provide the youth entrusted to their care with the services and supports that they need to successfully return to the community. Much of the programming that was touted by Director Abed in DYRS's testimony earlier this week no longer takes place with regularity or is not done in a format that the counselor or any professional focused on youth rehabilitation would describe as productive or effective. For example, the programming referenced by Director Abed, including classes such as life skills and counseling, are typically delivered through worksheets. Guards, referred to as youth development representatives who are not trained in behavioral health pass out worksheets and then place youth in groups to complete the worksheets and engage in ad hoc conversations. In the last week, JSP saw this so-called programming devolve into staff yelling and swearing at several different youth and threatening kids with a cool out for laughing while the staff member was talking. JSP has also witnessed YDRs pass out worksheets to youth, instruct them to talk amongst themselves, and proceed to sit in a corner of the unit entirely disengaged from the group of youth. These YDR-led sessions are not supplementing a more robust structured program. They are the entirety of the programming. When JSP asked youth about outside programming coming into the facility, many youth responded that it used to happen, but that it no longer does, or happened only once. It's critical to note that youth who are at YSC for months have no consistent individualized behavioral health services provided by trained professionals, despite the readily apparent needs of this population. A very high percentage of the youth are medicated, but beyond medication, DYRS does not provide the therapy that the youth need to begin to heal from the trauma and other challenges and to achieve rehabilitation. DYRS also fails to provide structured daily physical activity that meets the requirement of large muscle movement, despite the fact that it is now beyond dispute that physical activity is essential for physical and mental health. Testimony regarding yoga, spiritual services, animal therapy, and family engagement was similarly aspirational and not reflective of the on-the-ground reality at YSC. Youth have shared that when yoga happens, it happens only during their physical education time, thereby displacing more desirable activities such as basketball and not as an additional program. Youth advised JSP that the meditation process listed on the daily schedule from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. in reality consists of youth getting 10 minutes to themselves. Morning and evening circles, also reflected on the schedule, are now a bare-bones recitation of expectations. Under previous DYRS administrations, the morning circle was called Harambe, and it was a genuine celebration of coming together as a community and setting the intention for a positive day. Further, not every youth has a credible messenger, and some youth who have credible messengers see those adults rarely and irregularly. Under DYRS directors Lacey and Cairns, DYRS contracted with Summit Therapy Animal Services to provide animal therapy, which consisted of certified dog handlers providing individual animal-assisted therapy. The sessions could center around psychotherapy and counseling or calming interactions for youth with disabilities, PTSD, and other challenges. That level of therapy has not been provided recently, and youth and staff have told JSP that they have not seen any animal therapy services at YSC in months. Instead, what JSP sees is that the restorative justice coordinator at New Beginnings has a dog and that the dog comes to New Beginnings. While children love the contact with this restorative justice practitioner and appreciate the presence of the dog, this is not animal therapy. Further, the OASIS program, which does have animals, is only available to a very small number of youth who are at New Beginnings. Only those youth who are at level 6 or home petition status. Therefore, less than a dozen committed youth at New Beginnings have access to services and programming of OASIS. Religious services used to provide a meaningful connection for youth at YSC. During past DYRS administrations, there was access for youth to weekly Juma services and other regular programming from different faith leaders. Now, Christian services at YSC are irregular and occasional. With respect to Islamic services, much of the programming is limited to the time of Ramadan. Since Ramadan, some youth have said that services were available to them, while others have said that they have not had access to religious programming in months, underscoring the lack of consistency across programming. While DYRS touted family engagement also, there's little more than family visitation and phone calls between youth and their families. Even this is not consistent or robust for every single youth because youth have limited number of minutes to use the phone and not all families are able to regularly visit. DYRS does not regularly facilitate family therapy at YSC. In explaining long lengths of stay and awaiting placement status in this programming deficient environment, Director Abbott placed some fault in the Article 6 process, which allows youth to request a hearing to challenge out-of-state placement. However, the vast majority of youth who are placed outside of the district consent to that placement and never have an Article 6 hearing. Administrative hearings happen rarely, and court reviews of decisions are even more rare. The assertion that Article 6 hearings are in any significant way part of the delay in moving youth out of YSC is misleading and factually incorrect. Youth languish at YSC in awaiting placement status because the DYRS care coordination team is not prioritizing the initial evaluation and placement of youth and begin the entire process far too late. Many case managers report feeling as though they cannot make independent decisions and that multi-layered bureaucratic interference causes extreme delays, and that case managers who are left disempowered which leads to more distrust from youth and families, resulting in a lack of buy-in regarding placements. Youth also languish at YSC because DYRS lacks a community-based continuum of care, both in terms of services that should be available to youth, such as trauma-based therapy, and placement options such as therapeutic foster care, group homes, and independent living houses. The council should be incredibly disturbed with DYRS's testimony that youth who can safely be in the community are instead held in secure detention because DYRS and presumably CFSA cannot find foster care placements for these youth. Youth also spend additional months at New Beginnings because DYRS's discharge process has stalled. Rather than planning for reentry at the time of admission, DYRS only begins planning for transfer to home after youth have completed all 6 levels of the New Beginnings program and successfully made it to home petition, the final stage. During prior DYRS administrations, discharge planning began at level 4, and youth could remain on home petition for no more than several weeks while the final documentation was completed. Now a child cannot even have a discharge meeting until they have remained on home petition for 2 weeks without major incidents. Once the discharge meeting occurs, youth still wait for at least a month and often longer to be released. Many children who have made it to the home petition level express frustration about having done everything that was asked of them, and yet they have no clarity from DYRS about the timeline for their release. In addition to driving despair and frustration, prolonged incarcerations creates worse outcomes for youth and the community. It increases the likelihood that youth will not graduate from high school, has a detrimental impact on employment, and corresponds to worse physical and mental health in the long term. In closing, DYRS is responsible for 177 committed youth and less than 100 pretrial youth. It has a budget of more than $93 million per year. Despite the small number of youth and the resources available to this agency, DYRS is failing to provide the care and rehabilitative programming that committed and detained youth need to succeed. Prior DYRS administrations provided much more to youth in terms of programming within DYRS facilities and in terms of care and rehabilitation during commitment. The council should demand the most effective, rehabilitative, and positive services for vulnerable youth who are in the care of DYRS and who will return to the community in a matter of months or years. Thank you for this opportunity to testify, and we welcome any questions.
Thank you. So I'll start with you, Mr. Jordan, in terms of questions. Starting with positives, where are some areas of improvement that you've noted over the last year? I know from some of the data you've shared, staffing has improved, but where would you say there are the brightest lights that we're moving in the right direction within DYRS?
I would say in the medical area, there has been some improvements driven in part by filling key staff positions. There's a new medical director. There are also new nurse practitioners, and that has made a big difference in the operations of the medical area of the facility, of both facilities, frankly. Very recently, at least at New Beginnings, we've seen some staffing improvements. Staff morale is up there. They're still not where they need to be, but overtime is down, and they're doing better on that front. Those are the 2 that jump to mind the most. I would say the YSC is struggling more, and I think, as I emphasized in my testimony, I think a lot gets driven by operational needs when the population gets high, and I think that's largely where they are right now. But I know you've asked about positives, so I'm going to stop there for the moment.
And where are you seeing the greatest rooms for improvement across the agency?
Well, I think at the YSC, between the 2 facilities, the YSC is a much more difficult facility to run because of the constant admissions and releases. And currently, when they are above capacity, as I mentioned, historically, when youth come into that facility, they were able to put them into newly arrived youth into a separate unit. That has a lot of benefits because a lot of those youth, before they get into the rest of the facility, they will stay there, and many of them will be released. There are a lot of youth who are released quickly. They can't do that right now, and so youth are placed immediately on housing units. Because of that, they end up, as newly arrived youth are placed, dividing units into smaller groups for a period of time to assess whether or not there are any conflicts between youth. And when that happens, everybody gets less time out of cells. It impacts the provision of things like large muscle activity. It impacts things like education on the housing units. So I think that's a real challenge. And I think programming generally in the afternoon, at the Y, typically during the week, there's school in the morning, there's lunch, and then early afternoon, there's a shift change when the afternoon shift starts. Youth go back into their cells, they're locked down for a period of time. And then there's a room search before they come out. And by 3:30, they should be out of their cells. There's a period of time between 3:30 and bedtime, which can vary based on youth levels, 8 o'clock, 8:30, when there's an opportunity for sort of programming. And by and large, that's where we see there is not much programming happening. Youth come out, there's a group session led by YDR staff. Many times these are YDR staff who are already working double shifts. They're tired. They're not trained behavioral health staff. So they run a unit, a group that they may have come up with themselves, of a duration that may vary. During that time period, youth are going to eat dinner. They're going to make phone calls. TVs come on at 6 o'clock. During this window, we see a lot of card playing. We see a lot of informal activity on the units rather than structured activities.
And when you talk about programming in terms of what ideally we would want to see, what are some of those aspects? I would imagine you're alluding to some of the things Ms. Semenova was referring to: animal therapy, family engagement, more physical activity. Is that what you're referring to as?
Certainly, more structured activity. Largely, there's a lot of unstructured activity. Youth routinely talk about it, staff routinely talk about it. So adding structure to their afternoons is an opportunity to provide more treatment, to provide more physical activity. All of these things are impacted by staffing levels, for sure. If you can only have one staff on a housing unit, what that means is that some youth are going to stay in their cells while other youth are out. That means you can't leave the unit. The opportunity to go to the gym is taken off the table, for example. So that tends to happen more on weekends. Just the way that staff schedules work, every staff member is entitled to 2 days off per week. A part of the workforce has Friday, Saturday off. A part of the workforce has Sunday, Monday. So those 4 days, structurally, a part of the workforce will not be working. And those are the days when there are the most difficulties staffing fully the facility.
And I'm going to ask both of you all this question. And it's essentially that if we could redesign DYRS, think beyond our current framework, where should we begin and what should we be striving for? Because one of the things I'm not completely sold on is how it's currently structured is the way it has to be in terms of intake at YSC, the overflow, the lack of programming, the limited placements, et cetera. And so, Ms. Semenova, I'm going to ask you a similar question, but if I were to pose that to you, where would you point us? How could we reimagine DYRS as an agency to put it on a better path forward?
Something that Director Abed raised was the issue of Virginia's assessment centers. There's a lot of discussion about the awaiting placement population in DYRS care right now. And he said that in Virginia, for example, they have separate assessment centers. It provides a very different opportunity. If you are able to separate committed youth from detained youth, right now they're intermixed at the YSC. They're on the same housing units. And by and large, programming is the same for those. If you had an assessment center, you could provide a very different level of service, a different level of, frankly, depth of assessment, be providing services, including behavioral health services, in a way that's not provided at the YSC. The spatial constraints that they have right now are simply, in my mind, exacerbating the programming options that they have. I think it drives a lot of what happens right now. And that wasn't always the case. As I mentioned, there was a 6-year period when the population was really below 60. Very different operational pace, very different set of operational, decisions that you can make. You could separate populations and it gives you an opportunity. But that's one thing that certainly comes to mind.
Okay. And before I switch gears, I did want to come to this discussion around recidivism. And there seems to be some disagreement. I heard the director suggest, well, recidivism isn't the best indicator for success. I'm not completely sold on that. And then the director went on to say there are other metrics like the success of the young person after they've left DYRS's custody, although he admitted we're not really tracking that. How would you encourage us to look at recidivism as it relates to the success of the agency? And how might we get our hands on data more frequently? Because the director also suggested that that was a challenge, just having more information available to them.
I agree about the information availability. It's key. I do think when you're talking, this is an agency that is charged with rehabilitating youth. So I think part of that is looking at whether youth continue to commit delinquent acts. That's important. It's very relevant. But it's not a high enough bar if your charge is really to rehabilitate youth, to make them productive citizens, to give them a chance that a lot of these kids never had. You do want to look at those, what he referred to as positive youth outcomes, and that is important. Are they engaging in the workforce? Are they able to live independently? Are they able to pursue additional academic levels? And that could look like a lot of different things. Some of them may want to get involved in vocational training, just attaining those skills that will enable them to lead productive lives as citizens, wherever they choose.
And is your office tracking any of that information currently?
We do not. We are limited to the conditions within the facilities. The Road Act is obviously in front of the council. I think the Road Act does something very different, and in some ways looks at higher order questions. It's looking more at the issue of how is this agency, how are the programs affecting youth's lives down the road, which is a much higher order and frankly, much more important question than the more narrow question of what's happening in the facilities. I mean, I think table stakes is when youth are incarcerated, we need to make sure that they are safe and secure. But that is by far, that's a far stretch from what the goal of rehabilitating youth is. So I think the Road Act actually looks to some of those questions.
Thank you. Semenova, I want to come to you. What faith do you have in DYRS's efforts to reduce the amount of time that youth are spending within the care of the agency?
So as it relates to faith we have in the agency, what I will say is this. I think if the agency does a lot of what it's currently purporting to do, I think it could address some of those concerns. I think one of the big things, and Ms. Semyonovia talked about it in testimony, a lot of the case management staff who are tasked with doing a lot of these things to get the ball rolling on placement and things, and programs and services for the young people who are awaiting placement truly are disempowered. I've sat in multiple meetings where, we've asked case managers for, questions, simple questions, and they've said, well, I have to talk to my supervisor. The supervisor then has to talk to a program manager. And it's a lot of the decisions are so top heavy right now that it's taking substantial periods of time to get answers for basic things for young people who are in awaiting placement. And that's just one category of, I think, some of the issues. So I think,
if I could
yes.
just follow up right there. So when you say top heavy, is there a specific person or team within the agency that is serving as a bottleneck?
So I can't say for certain. What I have seen though is the care coordinators, which are like the case management positions, and oftentimes the care coordinator supervisors often look to folks above them to provide answers. And and sometimes maybe even a program manager is waiting for additional leadership. Sometimes we have to wait to speak to general counsel to get input. So I guess,
And you would argue that that is a shift from how it was before.
yeah, I've noticed very distinctly where there were regularly occasions where we would go to case management in previous administrations, ask questions as to what is going on with our clients and the work that they're doing, and we would get answers immediately. That just simply does not happen anymore.
Got you. And Ms. Semenova, you talked about the delay in discharging youth, specifically at New Beginnings, and that this process can take, if I recall correctly, 30 or more days. When the director was here, he talked about that it's the deputy director that ultimately signs off that says the youth is discharged, and they are working with behavioral management team and what used to be the TDM team, but that are now these care coordinators. Can you elaborate on what you're noticing and/or what differences you've noted from the change in leadership at DYRS?
Yes, so if I may, previously when young people were discharging, they're under maybe 2 administrations ago, Director Cairns was pretty adamant of this understanding that the importance of reentry planning very early on. She had instructed folks to say, we're going to really start discharge planning at level 4 of the program. And the program, in essence, really is about 9 levels.
Yes.
I'm sorry, my apologies, about 8 levels. So right now, what we are practically seeing is that youth have to wait until the final level, which is the home petition level, at least 2 weeks into what is called, according to DYRS's own documentation that they provided to us on September 9th, to quote, activate the discharge process. So that's very, very late in the game and a big change from what has happened and is causing a lot of delays, a lot of frustration from young people, because on that final home petition level, one of the things that's required is essentially no incidents, no issues, nothing going on. But if there's so much delay, we're waiting to see what's going to happen, what's getting in place for young people when they return home. Of course, those anxieties, those frustrations are going to build, which can lead to incidents, right? And then young people are put back and it extends the time even more. So it becomes this challenging cycle. And even for our young folks who are really hanging on and trying their best to ensure that they maintain behaviors, there's still often delays because of some administrative reasons.
Got it. So whereas the discharge process at one time started at level 4, it's starting now much later. And it provides this opportunity for young people not only to grow discontent, but to find themselves in a circumstance where their length of stay may be longer.
Absolutely.
I noted, and then that also just speaks to the programming available. What I'm clear about is that these modules that these young people are going through are very structured. And then once you've done them, it doesn't seem like there's much more for the young person to do that's meaningful. And so in your experience, for the young people that are staying longer than they should, what type of programming is offered?
Yeah, so I will say this, New Beginnings definitely offers a lot more than YSC, significantly so.
Yes.
However, your point is exactly right. Once they've met all the programming opportunities, they're kind of sitting stagnant. There's not much more
So
to
is it that
achieve.
they
So
just don't engage in anything, or are they forced to then repeat things they've already gone through?
yes, so they're repeating the things they've already gone through. They're sitting in the same, they're going to school still, right? Because that's the one thing that's really consistent. If there are groups and things that are happening on their unit, they continue to sit in those. They're expected to continue attending the programs that are offered to show that they are able to maintain behaviors because it's a behavior modification program. So they're kind of continuing the same things that they have been doing and have to continue to engage. Otherwise, it continues the cycle of delay for discharge.
Okay. And then, Ms. Semenova, if you can submit your testimony, but what I noted from what you shared, the life skills, although they're being touted, they're often done through worksheets. There's no consistent behavioral health services. And that is something that the DYRS took a special issue with when I was at the facility and went to great lengths to stress how robust of services they're providing. Can you speak to your experience with the young people you're working with, the quality and the scope of behavioral health services that they're receiving?
Absolutely. So I went and spent the day at YSC yesterday. I spoke with multiple staff. I spoke with multiple young people. I went on the units myself and saw it firsthand. And this is consistent with everybody on my team. We have attorneys, law clerks who have consistently reported. I had everybody pull information to make sure that we were providing direct firsthand knowledge and experience here. Yesterday, when I went, I spoke with multiple young people and asked, what are you getting regarding mental health? The consistent answer was, oh, well, mental health comes onto the units. They check in if there's been an incident that has happened, right? If a fight has happened on the unit, they'll check in there. They come in and they check on me. And I said, oh, do they pull you and have a therapy session? It's usually, no, not unless I've done something or if I requested it. Maybe a couple of times in a month I get pulled, not for a long period of time. Most young people, though, have said that while they are on the unit, staff come and do what we've just essentially called spot checks. For a couple of minutes, mental health staff may come in and talk to those young folks. For young people who are maybe on suicide prevention status, who are required to have more structured contact with behavioral health staff, they may have more. But for the standard young person who is there without those extra things, it's primarily spot treatment.
And that aligns with my suspicion that at YSC, young people there are receiving little to no mental health or behavioral health services. What the director noted on Monday was, well, at YSC, it's different than New Beginnings. And at YSC, the young people who are in need of significant mental health care, and I thought that was an interesting note and distinction, they are receiving it. So to your point, if you are on suicide watch or you are being designated as needing a significant form of care, it seems like you may receive that at YSC, but otherwise, what you're saying is you're largely not seeing those services happening.
Yes. The one thing or the two things I guess I would add are, one unit reported that there was one mental health group that came that week. They couldn't really remember what was discussed. It wasn't individualized. It was a group session that had happened. I talked to other young people to see if that was something that was consistent, and it wasn't. The other thing I would add is, I think it's really interesting because our attorneys have clients who have very robust, significant mental health needs. We had a discussion with an attorney yesterday about this. And when speaking with that young person, said, how often do you see mental health? They're not getting pullouts. But because of what we know from this young person's psychological evaluation, I would categorize them as somebody with significant need for behavioral health support. And they are still just getting those spot treatments.
If I can just add, when we not only talk to youth, but also review health records, we see a lot of, I would say that there are different service lines that happen. When youth come in, they initially will get what's called a MAZE. This is it's a screening. So you want to assess whether or not they're an immediate risk to themselves or to others, whether there's any evidence of psychosis. That's not even administered by a behavioral health staff. But within a couple of days, a behavioral health staff member is going to do an initial sort of interview, and they'll document on this interview sheet a problem list. So if a youth has behavioral health problems reported, et cetera, they'll be documented and they'll be included in the behavioral health record. And, we see disproportionately, there's a lot of references to trauma. There's a lot of references to substance use and abuse. And in some cases, they may have some other knowledge of other behavioral health diagnoses that they'll include. For youth there's typically, I think, a 7-day check-in with most youth who are there that long. So a behavioral health staff member may check in. I don't think that's necessarily a full therapy session based on this. Beyond that, we do see a lot of contacts with behavioral health. But they typically they are referrals often for incidents. So a staff member can make a referral, a youth can refer themselves. And
Because
certainly,
what we're told is after every incident, there's a behavioral health team member that's checking in with the young person. And so,
I can't say after every incident. I think it's not uncommon after an incident for there to be a check-in. But I think that's should be distinguished between a robust behavioral health program that, typically what you'll see is a problem list. There's an assessment, a problem list is developed, and then you go through a therapeutic process to work through those problems over the course of weeks and months or longer. That involves sitting down with a behavioral health therapist. That's what we don't typically see. It's that level of ongoing therapy that that is really going to. It does happen at New Beginnings, where they have a behavioral health specialist on the housing units. So I think this is consistent what we're hearing from Ms. Mobley and what they're seeing. There are behavioral health specialists there. They are, meeting with youth, but it's not what you would consider clinical therapy on a regular basis. It's going to get at diagnosed problems.
okay. I have a few more questions. I'm taking the liberty since it's just me today, and then I'm going to go to another panel. But the reason why I think this is so important is because of the emphasis and the need for rehabilitation, not just detention. And what is clear, and the reason why I keep harping on the rates of recidivism, is that we're just churning young people in and out of our criminal justice system. And it is certainly an area of focus for me, and I will keep pressing on that. Ms. Mobley or Ms. Semenova, I will ask you, when I was speaking with the director, I noted the increase or the high levels of placement in secure detention facilities here and elsewhere within DYRS versus more community-based or less secure placements. One of the things the director noted was that safety is a key consideration, obviously, but that the agency will be looking at how they might increase community-based placements in the future. What are you seeing, and or what might you recommend for the well-being and success of the agency overall in terms of more secure versus less secure, detention versus community-based programs?
I think one of the large things that is a consistent theme that has come up, advocates have talked about it, I think many folks in DYRS would agree, we need a much more robust continuum of care and community-based services and supports to ensure young folks are successful. And I would proffer that that is where the investments must go to see our young people do well. Because even at this point, with such high rates of secure detention and so many young people detained, those young folks are going to, at some point, return to their community. So in order to do that, I think it's important to talk to young people, to talk about the things, what are they seeing that works? There's a lot of great research in Ms. Semenova's testimony. She provides a report, I believe, from the Sentencing Project, or cites to the Sentencing Project report that talks about why youth incarceration fails. With that report, there's a subsequent report that talks about what helps, right? In that report, I believe it talks about youth advocacy programs, credible messenger services, more robust things like that to provide structure and support while young people are in their communities to see them do well. The research is there. We know the root causes. The CJCC issued the report. I think leaning into that and ensuring a full, robust continuum of care is what is going to ensure young folks are most successful. And with that, right now, DYRS must, not just with our young folks who are at New Beginnings or in these residential placements, but even short-term stays, even while if they're at YSC awaiting placement for a short period of time before they are released back to a foster home or a group home. Reentry planning has to start immediately. It's going to be a game changer for young folks so they can have everything set up. So when they are released, they walk back into a full plan and a full team and family of supports. And DYRS must be able to foster that.
Which is one of the things that the Road Act, I think, will help us move towards.
Yes.
Last question before I move to another panel, a similar one that I asked Mr. Jordan, if we could reimagine DYRS, and you're giving us some very specific recommendations, where would you recommend we look toward and where to start?
So I agree with Mr. Jordan as he talked about the importance of programming at the YSC. It is vital for, again, this goes to the short-term and long-term reentry planning for young people to eventually go to their next placement. So often our young folks are lingering in this awaiting placement status without therapeutic behavioral health supports, additional programming that has been recommended by various evaluations. So they're waiting in this kind of limbo phase without anything, and they are feeling disempowered, they're feeling frustrated, they're feeling like this is dead time. That's a consistent thing we hear from our
Yes.
clients. So, and then they're sent to a placement eventually and expected to turn it on and engage and it goes smoothly. And that almost never happens. That transition just doesn't work that way because of this stagnant period. So ensuring programming, maybe incentivizing young people and engaging in programming, because even if it may take a delay, is there a way to have some of that time and program and investment credited towards their ultimate placement? It ensures buy-in. Young folks feel like they're receiving procedural justice and fairness, which we know results in better outcomes for young folks. The other thing I would note, I'm really focusing on the importance of reentry upon entry. The Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention has talked about the importance. The National Institute of Corrections, specifically talking about young folks, have talked about the importance and the benefit of that. I would also note and highlight the CORE's racial and ethnic assessment, racial and ethnic assessment that was done, talks about and provides statistics as to how different states that really focus on these things have lowered their recidivism rates. It really can be a game changer. So I just wanted to highlight that, and providing programming, providing better reentry supports can be the thing.
And which report
Yes.
points to other jurisdictions, just so we can note it?
Yes, so the core report talks about
Got it.
New York and California specifically, and I believe maybe Washington State.
Got it.
The other thing that I would add is, kind of touches on something I mentioned earlier about really this top-heavy approach that seems to be happening right now. DYRS must have better internal communication and transparency. Far too often do I walk into a facility and staff approach me raising issues. I walked into YSC yesterday and staff came to me. I spoke with staff folks who I've known for years who have immediately come and said, when is so-and-so leaving? When is this kid going to get out of here? They feel bad for the young people who are in a waiting placement. They're feeling frustrated that, young people are waiting, behaviors may increase, right? So they're wanting to know these things. Also, on the other side, care coordination feels disempowered, and there's so much lack of communication, and that's just what staff is sharing. We ask questions of some person and they give us one answer. We ask it to somebody else and they're giving us another answer, and they may source where they were told that information. It's so unclear internally. There's such a lack of transparency, and the staff feel frustrated with it. And I'm reporting that from what DYRS staff have told me themselves. And I think that kind of internal strife also is creating harms and delays, which ultimately trickle down to the young people that they're supposed to serve.
That is super helpful.
I think that's what would reimagine it.
Yes, no, thank you. You've given a lot of great context, and we are using today's hearing as an avenue to follow up with the agency. And as I mentioned before, we're still waiting on the agency's responses. I'm gonna take them at their word in good faith that they've been working all week to get us those responses. But there clearly is some disconnect from what advocates and people who are working with the agency are experiencing, what we're hearing, and even in some instances, what I saw myself. So more to come, but thank you all for sharing your testimony with us today.
Thank you so much.
I will call up the next panel. And I'm going to apologize in advance if I mispronounce your name. Whitney Lackheim, co-founder and chief operating officer, the Open City Advocates. Joshua Miller, research and advocacy director of Open City Advocates. Magdalena Saingas, policy manager with the Council for Court Excellence. And Ms. Lackheim, you can begin.
Good morning, or afternoon it might be, Chairman Parker. My name is Whitney Lockheim. I'm a resident of Ward 6, and I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer of Open City Advocates, which provides legal representation and holistic advocacy to youth who have been committed to DYRS. I have been working with children committed to DYRS for more than 20 years and have represented about 140 young people in the system. I have observed both heartbreaking trauma and the joy the young people experience when they can thrive and grow in their own communities. Today, I want to talk about the commitment process and how we have observed it going wrong in the past 18 months. In our cases, Open City Advocates is typically appointed as defense counsel after the young person is committed to DYRS. Before commitment, DYRS is supposed to have assigned a pre-commitment worker to a young person, completed a needs assessment, the Youth Level of Service, or YLS, and have identified potential placements. That's what DYRS's case management handbook says should happen. Lately, that has not been the process. DYRS rarely completes these tasks prior to the disposition hearing. In some cases, it has taken months for DYRS even to assign a care coordinator after disposition, and the young person is sitting at the Youth Services Center without receiving treatment or services. I support DYRS's adoption of the YLS needs assessment, but I have also seen DYRS mishandle that process for children awaiting placement. The YLS involves interviewing the young person, family, and other people in the young person's life, and looking at any evaluations or records related to the young person. It helps determine their needs and the intensity of services they are supposed to get. Sometimes I've seen DYRS not perform the YLS with fidelity, such as interviewing only the child and not the parents or any other family members. In some cases, DYRS has decided on a placement before even completing the YLS. DYRS is responsible for identifying an appropriate placement for committed children. This responsibility includes collecting the necessary information from court social services to identify and secure a placement, sending applications to potential placements, developing an individualized treatment plan, and completing any interstate compact paperwork for children they're sending out of state. The problems with DYRS's handling of the awaiting placement population at YSC became significantly worse early last year, and the awaiting placement period is lengthened. The YLS is not being done by the time of commitment, and staff cover multiple roles without the proper credentials or training. For example, care coordinators are supposed to act as social workers and case managers, and are the primary person responsible for a young person's treatment plan, placement decisions, and services. Yet we have seen both pre-commitment caseworkers and team meeting facilitators stepping in as care coordinators, sometimes for months. DYRS is also required to develop individualized treatment plans for children who are committed, but I have never seen them do that or never seen one. In the past, the wait time to get placed would have been a month after commitment at most. Even then, a month is a long time for a child to spend at YSC, especially considering time spent incarcerated before adjudication. And YSC, as you heard, does not offer consistent or in-depth services or programming. 5 to 6 years ago, by the time of the disposition hearing, application packets to potential placements would have already been sent out, and a young person might have already been accepted into a facility. The court used to be able to handle any interstate compact hearing for out-of-state placements at the same time as disposition, because the young person was already accepted into a facility by then. Now, it seems like 2 months after commitment is the minimum wait time. Just getting a care coordinator assigned takes weeks or months. I've seen youth wait 8 months at YSC following commitment. The average length of commitment is 2 years. So this means that a child could spend up to a third of the time that a judge has determined necessary for rehabilitation just sitting at YSC without an appropriate placement or individualized treatment. We as a city can do better than that. I will now turn to my colleague to discuss some ramifications of the current processes, and I am available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
Good morning. To continue the points made by my colleague Whitney, the problems with awaiting placement at the Youth Services Center have significant consequences. During this time, our clients who are awaiting placement are getting quite frustrated and confused. They do not know who to talk to about the delay or where they may be sent. Staff are telling them different things about what placements they might go to, how long they will have to wait, and how long they might spend at the placements. They are often changing hands between different DYRS workers without much warning or coordination, which weakens trust. We often have to do a lot of digging and pushing to figure out what is going on. When the family court commits a youth to DYRS custody, the intention is to provide the youth with rehabilitative services and supervision for the duration of the commitment. The longer the youth spends awaiting placement at YSC, the less time they have to spend engaging in rehabilitation during the course of their commitment. The effect of these long placement times is terrible on young people. There are a lot of lockdowns, violence, and short staffing at YSC. Those three things mean that kids are locked in their cells often, which in itself causes trauma and mental health problems. They also miss out on a lot of school time because of these lockdowns and short staffing. Often, education proceeds with the distribution of paper packets rather than in-person instruction. We've heard this repeatedly. They don't get to go to the gym much. We hear reports of less than once a week, and their movement is limited. For kids who are already experiencing the effects of trauma and have mental health needs, which is most of them, this results in them decompensating significantly. There are minimal mental health services at YSC. They have short check-ins and unruly group sessions approximately weekly, and one psychiatrist for about 100 children. They're not doing evidence-based therapies. Kids aren't getting the mental health services they need this way. Their mental health is deteriorating in part because they're not being told why they are still at YSC, or they're getting conflicting stories from staff. Young people are basically in a state of duress by the time their placement is decided. It wears on them. They feel that it's dead time to be at YSC because that time does not count toward any future placements timeline. For example, OCA clients have been told that their placement is New Beginnings, which they did not want to go to because of a safety concern or their mental health needs, but they're still willing to go at that point because they'll go anywhere to start their time in programming. And it is rare that OCA attorneys challenge DYRS's decision to send a child out of state, even if it's an inappropriate placement or too far from family, because the client just wants to get out of YSC. In these cases, clients will say, just send me. To summarize, the awaiting placement delays at YSC are causing significant trauma and harm for youth who are committed to DYRS. Their mental health decompensates, their education is stymied, and they are unable to engage in normal adolescent experiences such as bonding with family and community. This has become an urgent issue for youth committed to DYRS. I'm happy to answer any questions on this or other aspects of our written testimony or my own experience.
Thank you. Can you pronounce your name for me? Make sure I got it right.
Yes, Magdalena Chungus.
Chungus.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Parker, for the opportunity to present this testimony. My name is Magdalena Chungus, and I am the policy manager at the Council for Court Excellence, CCE, a nonpartisan nonprofit whose mission is to enhance justice in DC. This testimony does not reflect the specific views or endorsement by any judicial member of CCE. In recognition of the significant problem of too many DC committed youth being held at the Youth Services Center while awaiting placement, CCE is supporting the members of the Juvenile Justice Advisory Group, JJAG, to produce a timely report that clearly summarizes the issues, barriers, and proposes solutions that could decrease the number of youth being held post-commitment without proper placements. We recently conducted 2 meetings with various JJAG agency members, as well as youth leaders in action, youth advisors, to explore these barriers and potential solutions. Currently, roughly 29% of the YSC population are committed youth awaiting placement in secure facilities. This translates into 28 youth, although that number has been as high as 41 at other points in this year. While DYRS is legally required to complete an assessment of youth by day 3 of commitment and to complete individual treatment plans 14 days later, in practice, these assessments and plans are not being completed within these timeframes. Also of note, while awaiting placement, youth at YSC sit with dead time, as time at YSC does not go towards the amount of time they must complete in placement. So in effect, they're being punished longer than the judge determined was necessary. Being held for longer periods of time can, as we heard, frustrate young people, especially with limited programming at YSC. This frustration and lack of positive outlets can and has resulted in youth acting out and at times picking up further charges, which can start the clock all over again as they begin the process with a new case. All of this should concern us because the evidence is clear that increased time incarcerated further exacerbates many negative outcomes for youth. Looking at long-term impacts of incarceration, there are substantially worse physical and mental health outcomes for youth who were incarcerated into their adulthood, including depressive symptoms and suicidality. A wide range of barriers are contributing to these long wait times for placement. which will be elaborated on in our written report for the JJAG later this year. The JJAG has not yet made specific recommendations and will not do so until the report is final. But today I'll discuss two of the barriers: limited placements and a lack of planning prior to disposition, and potential solutions that we've discussed in our work groups. When youth are committed to DYRS, there are a variety of placements where they can be subsequently sent. In addition to New Beginnings, these include local group homes, therapeutic foster care, out-of-state group homes, residential treatment centers, and psychiatric residential treatment facilities. Due to a limited number of available spots in these placements, many of which are out of state, ranging from Pennsylvania, Florida, and more, the process is to ensure a space for a committed child can be prolonged. Our work group has suggested that maintaining an updated provider list with increased collaboration and data sharing between youth-serving agencies, analyzing and comparing rates for these placements to ensure DC is competitive with other jurisdictions, rebuilding a larger provider pool, and investing in more community-based supports and services could help address this issue. Those participating in our meetings also expressed concern that available placement options were driving decisions around where a youth was sent, and that placement decisions often did not include meaningful family engagement. Advocates and agency staff also raised concern over lack of scheduled planning time in the current system. Because of this lack of planning, a judge may ask for a commitment prior to a CSSD recommendation, meaning an exploration of the needs and options for a youth, including even alternatives to commitment, have not yet been explored. This planning then must take place after commitment, leading to longer wait times and potentially unnecessary commitments for youth who, in fact, were not assessed as needing to be in secure confinement. It's worth noting that in 2023, in the first half of 2024, almost half, 47% of admissions to New Beginnings did not involve a violent offense. Meeting participants suggested conducting youth assessments upon first contact with the system, perhaps intake, to begin exploring what services they can be connected to, whether or not there's a subsequent commitment, and preparing required placement information pre-disposition. This would then be included with the recommended adjudication and, when applicable, the notice of intent to commit. These assessments should also consider the role that a youth's family can play and what the least restrictive options are given the youth and family's strengths, needs, and situation. Long-term, we look forward to making a DC that can better support young people through increased agency collaboration, transparency, and engagement with youth and families at each step of the process, and greater investment in community-based and local placements instead of frequent out-of-state residential facilities that separate children from their families and communities. This should be part of a longer effort to reduce the need to use residential secure facilities in the first place. Other jurisdictions, such as Connecticut, have shown this is possible, with the state closing its last youth prison in 2018 without sacrificing public safety, after years of prioritizing other investments, such as enhanced behavioral health services for youth. In 2021, Connecticut had the third lowest rate of incarceration for youth of any state, while DC had the fourth highest rate of youth incarceration. While much work remains to be done, thank you for your commitment to improving outcomes for youth in DC and the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Ms. Lockheim, I'm going to start with you around the fidelity with the YLS. Can you elaborate on what you're experiencing? Because what you're suggesting is alarming, because as I understand it, that assessment is determining the placement. So in the instances where you're saying it's not even being completed, how, in your experience, is DYRS determining where and how to place the young person?
The DYRS prior to the YLS was using something called the SDM, the Structured Decision-Making Score. And that's something they're still using in combination with the YLS, even though the YLS is not supposed to be used with that. My understanding is they're still using both. And the SDM was really essentially a risk assessment that was based on mostly offense and other negative questions, not really focused on needs, but more of just public safety risk. And that score would generate a low, medium, or high placement, meaning low being at home, medium meaning like group home, and high meaning secure detention or out of state. And so right now, if they're doing it the way they say they're doing it, they would do the YLS and the SDM and then use those in combination to decide a placement. What we've been seeing sometimes when they're not doing it at all or doing it after the placement is they're just doing the SDM, which is a much shorter questionnaire. It's like 15 questions or something. It's really very short. And then determining the level of placement security.
That SDM is what is determining the low, medium, or high
Yes.
risk.
Yes, that's right. And then the placement level as a
Got it.
result of that. We also are seeing inexplicably overrides of the low and medium. So even if the YLS or the SDM comes out as low or medium, we're seeing the agency make an override to high. And we have been asking for that paperwork or that reasoning, and we've never gotten it.
And when you say override, meaning in terms of their placement.
Right,
Got it.
right.
Which tracks with the data. And I did ask the director about the large and increasing number of placements within secure facilities, including New Beginnings. And what Ms. Chungus just referenced is that almost 50% of the young people at New Beginnings are there for nonviolent offenses,
Yeah.
which means presumably more of them could be in community-based or residential programs. And I'm assuming you're suggesting that's likely because DYRS is overriding what these assessments are suggesting.
Yes,
that
or
accurate?
not doing the needs part and just doing the risk part. So I mean, even for the youth who do have violent offenses, they would also should be looking at what their needs are and what services they need. I would say
I
that,
wish I had my public defender services friends still on the panel, but is there a legal recourse for this?
that's
If
a great
young-
question. Yes, it's limited. We would have to, right now, can go back to the court to say that that DYRS is not providing the appropriate level of service, and then the court can specify services at that point. That is tough to get into court. It's tough to get in on that bar because we'd have to sort of prove that essentially they're doing nothing. It's difficult to get in and to get the court to act on that. The Road Act will help in that regard, I think, setting some transparency for what DYRS is supposed to be doing, and allowing the court and others to see what should be happening and what is happening. Annoyingly, really to our great frustration, the quickest recourse we have right now is called habeas corpus, a writ of habeas corpus, which we have to go and say that DYRS is legally detaining children. Because if, for example, a child is a medium and they're holding them at YSC, which happens often, the only way we can legally have recourse to that is, well, the easiest way anyway, the quickest way is habeas corpus, where we go and tell the court they're holding the child illegally. This is something we've had to do a lot more often lately than we used to have to do. We used to never really have to do it because we could advocate within DYRS to get proper placements, but that's increasingly becoming necessary.
And do you have any data you can share with us about the outcomes of those challenges? Both how many and the outcomes?
I don't have that right now. I'm happy to share it. Most of the time, threatening it will get some movement. So just saying that this is what we're going to have to do will get some movement within DYRS to find the appropriate placements and stop doing that. And then oftentimes filing it is the next level where it gets fixed before it gets to court. So it's sort of a multi-stage
Got it.
project.
And the Article 6 hearings is more so focused on the placement itself.
That's right. That's only if it's an out-of-state placement, not counting New Beginnings. So that's if a child is going to be sent to, say, Florida or Idaho or Pennsylvania, then that is a hearing that happens if the child or parent disputes that. But as my colleague said, most of the time, our clients don't dispute it because they're so eager to get out of YSC that they will go as far away as Florida or other places away from their family, even if they don't want to, just to get the process started.
Okay. How do you think DYRS should measure success? So I keep coming back to this topic of recidivism and/or positive outcomes for youth. How should we define success for the agency?
I agree with what Mr. Jordan said, that it is important to track recidivism, but it's just the lowest bar possible. We're tracking educational and employment outcomes, housing outcomes would be really painting a much more accurate and important picture of how youth are doing, which is some of the things that we track internally for ourselves. I also think that arrest rates, while are somewhat telling, also we know that the youth who are committed to DYRS range between 93% and 90% 97% Black youth. And so we know that they're going to be disproportionately arrested anyway. So I do think that that can be a shallow look at what's happening, whereas these other outcomes are more important, like
But
education.
no one's measuring them. Everyone says these outcomes are important and no
Right.
one's looking at them.
I agree for that for the government. We are looking them for our own youth and how we're doing as an organization, but we don't have comparative data.
Got it. Got it. Okay, Mr. Miller, I want to come to you. I want to stress the distinction between the reentry plan and the treatment plan. When I was speaking with the director earlier this week, he seemed to conflate the two or suggest they are one and the same. What would you say?
Well, they're certainly distinct. What I heard the director say was that they don't begin reentry planning until level 5 or something like that. But a treatment plan would be something that began at the very beginning, right? It begins with identifying needs. You heard Mr. Jordan describing kind of, a set of problems that a child has to work through, developing a treatment plan for each one of those. A reentry plan is going to be things like housing. It's going to be things like what school is this child going to go to? If there's a stay away order in their neighborhood, where are they going to be relocated to? It's going to be what other kinds of needs do they have? Do they need a bed so they can stay with their father? Do they need, a referral to DC Core Services Agency? Those sorts of things.
And one of the things that struck me is that external advocates and parties don't seem to have a formal role in that reentry plan design, that it seems more internal to DYRS, although the director did say they welcome input from external advocates. Which entities, if any, should be playing a part in this reentry plan design that's external to the agency?
Well, what we certainly see with our own attorneys is that the attorney is playing a role, right? So we're representing the client, and the teenager has us sort of doing a lot of the work behind the scenes. But I think that, in an ideal world, there would be case managers or social workers from the community-based provider who is a part of that planning from the beginning. And that's something that we believe is required, we know is required by new guidance from CMS. Basically, 30 days before somebody returns, they should already be seeing their community-based provider. And so that's somebody who could be in the picture. I mean, since housing is so often an issue, I would love to see that be a part of the picture as well.
Okay. The committee's understanding is that you've been working with the committee charged with implementing the mandate and waiver around Medicaid expansion. Could you provide your perspective on where things stand?
So there's a health system redesign subcommittee that's been working on this on a monthly basis. It's a large group of healthcare providers, advocates, representatives from DYRS, and we are, as a district, required to have an internal operational plan as of January 1st. And what I heard last Thursday is that we are not on track to do that. Now, we were only really given about 6 months to accomplish the goal, and it's a big lift for the district. Nonetheless, it looks like we are not going to make that target.
And what are the implications of that?
Well, that means that first, we won't be providing all of the early screening and prevention and therapeutic services that we could be providing to young people on their way home. And second, that reimbursements that might be available for those services won't be coming to the district, so it's going to cost us money. But more to the point, it means that the kinds of targeted case management that kids need really intensively as they start to head home and as they arrive home in the 30 days before and 30 days after release aren't available.
And in your assessment, why aren't we on track?
Well, so part of it is that we're not doing discharge planning until hours or days before a child is released, right? So we don't know when 30 days is. Part of it is that DYRS has not been able to create the relationships it needs with community providers. And I think other parts of it are tied to the difficulty, of interagency collaboration. But I think those are the most important two.
One last thing, I spoke with the director about the agency's participation with the JJAG. What I heard from the director was that, oh, we do participate, but we're not participating in this working group because it's redundant.
Yeah.
In your experience, what are you learning from the young people, and what might you say about DYRS's lack of engagement on this placement working group?
So, others can speak to this very well, including Ms. Chungus, but my experience is that, we work with Director Abed and with his team to bring the Youth Leaders in Action, the youth subcommittee of JJAG, inside of YSC, where we speak on a monthly basis with members of their youth advisory board. And, unfortunately, for months, we were meeting the same children, which is, shouldn't be happening because they shouldn't have been there 30, 60, 90 days later. And that the concerns that youth were raising, every month, the staff would say, we're going to work on that, right? And then the next month they say, well, we're still working on it. And we haven't seen progress or improvements on any of those things. The other issue that you're addressing really is this idea that the DYRS is not participating with the JJAG in working groups on solving the problem of awaiting placement, not allowing their staff to really sort of join in, even though they hold a crucial part of the puzzle, a key to the puzzle, we hope. I can't really say whether or not, well, I think that's deeply disappointing. That's all I can really say about it.
Yep. And again, the director said, oh, it's because it's redundant.
I heard him say,
yes. Also, well, I'll come to you, Ms. Chungus, and I'll start with that same question in terms of what you might be hearing from youth and the implications of DYRS's lack of engagement with the JJAG.
Sure. In these conversations, I think JJAG members have definitely expressed disappointment that DYRS has not been willing to engage in these conversations, especially because they are part of the JJAG normally. I think, as Josh mentioned, they are the keepers of a lot of information, not both just understanding what the issues are that are contributing to youth awaiting placement, but understanding what is feasible when it comes to solutions. So not having them in the room can make it more difficult to tease out what can actually be done. And some of what we've heard as issues contributing to this awaiting placement is a lack of interagency collaboration, right? And so I think that is also committing to this is more, right, lack of collaboration when they're not engaging in the conversation.
Elaborate on that when you say a lack of interagency collaboration?
So we've heard from, I think, especially from families and youth, like there are a lot of different agencies that are having touch points with these kids, right? CSSD, including and then DYRS. And so part of the issue is maybe the handoff between CSSD and DYRS we've heard could be done more smoother, right? And like we even heard from Director Abed that their planning for how to serve youth doesn't start until commitment. So there's not as warm of a handoff in understanding what happened in intake, which is what CSSD is doing, the intake, rather than DYRS doing that process. To your second point of the question on youth engagement, we shared that obviously YLA is part of the JJAG, and both OCA and PDS have been engaging with us on trying to interview youth and family members of youth who were previously in an awaiting placement at YSC and family members of youth who were either currently or previously at YSC awaiting placement. And then we're also working on creating now a survey to make it more accessible as well, to get more information from youth who were previously awaiting placement. Because I think in a lot of these conversations and even in the JJAG, while there's some youth and family engagement, there's also a lot of agency representation. And I think part of what we really hope to illuminate in this process that's not going to be duplicative of the other conversations happening is elevating youth and family voices in the process.
It's helpful. I do want to acknowledge that we've been joined by my at-large colleague, Anita Bonds, who is a member of this subcommittee. And so when we're done, I'll turn to you for a round of questions. Ms. Chungus, in your testimony, I was struck by the stat that you provided that nearly half of the young people at New Beginnings are there for a nonviolent offense. On Monday, you may recall that I asked the director about placement decisions, and he referenced safety as a major driver, which goes back to this need for fidelity in the assessment of distinguishing the level of risk of the young person. But how do you square like the number that you're giving and the director saying, well, we're placing more of these youth in secure facilities because of safety concerns?
I think it sounded like from what Whitney shared, part of it is potentially from an overriding of what the assessment is saying their level is. I think the director also spoke to saying at times they place youth in secure placements because they fear for that youth's safety in the community. But I think that really illuminates a huge failure on behalf of our youth if they're being placed in secure placement because there's nowhere safe for them to be in the community. And that should not be the reason that they're put in secure placement.
And obviously in your testimony, you're suggesting that we need to look at jurisdictions like Connecticut that are doing more community-based placements, so much so it sounds like they've eliminated their secure facility. Is that accurate?
Yes, so they eliminated their secure facility, their final youth prison. They do still have youth some youth are being held in adult facilities, so they're not completely, I think, there are still some youth who are incarcerated, but I think, they really, what we heard a lot from already is like a lack of behavioral health supports for kids, especially when they're at YSC. And that is a lot of what Connecticut invested in on the front end before closing this facility, is investing in mental health treatment for youth. And I think we heard the director speak to as well that if kids are not committed, they are not getting services. So a kid can be at YSC and be released, and they're not being connected to services from them. So I think that's, being committed should not be the impetus for kids getting access to mental health services.
That's right. And I think that's a failure. Whether you're at YSC for a week or you're there for many months, we need to provide that support and continuum. Something that we have received are partial responses from DYRS to pre-hearing questions as we await all of the responses. But it's clear that there are available slots at community-based and residential placements. At the same time, we are seeing significant delays at YSC, and the director would say, because in part, we're struggling to place young people. How do you, I'm coming at this in a different angle, but how do you square the fact that we have available slots in residential and community-based programs, yet we're deciding to hold some young people for months on end while we await placement, often at a secure detention facility?
I mean, I think some of that, maybe I can't speak to not doing the direct service work as some of the attorneys do. I think what we have heard from work groups is, again, there's not always communication between agencies or between agencies and community service providers. And one of the recommendations we had was to really create a more robust list of placements to have an understanding of what all the options are for kids. So that you're not just maybe relying on certain placements that are used frequently, and that you are looking at what does exist in the community outside of some of these secure placements. So I think there's more work to be done to really develop out fully all placement options for youth earlier in the process, so that we're not relying on secure facilities.
Yep, go for it.
I just wanted to add on to that. I agree with everything she said, is that I do think that some of that is, for example, there may be group home placements for boys, but there's no group home for girls. So that may be that they have a spot, but if a girl is sitting waiting, she wouldn't have a spot. They also used to, in previous administrations, have more foster home beds than they did group home beds. And that seems to have changed significantly. It seems much more difficult to get foster home placement. I don't understand why that is, but DYRS has had their own foster home contracts, which I think they still do, but they seem to have shrunk significantly from what they used to be. And then I also think that right now, because there is that lack of community support and in-home, whether it's behavioral health or help getting to school or family engagement, any of these things, there's just not that robust community-based continuum that home is viewed as a viable option if the child needs nothing, needs no support, which is never the case. There's always support needed. And I do think that a lot of the youth who are in both high and medium placements could thrive in the community if they had robust in-home supports, if they had, say, functional family therapy or other evidence-based therapies coming into the home multiple times a week and someone to help them get to school and helping with groceries and helping with furniture and the things that we know that youth and family need in that family therapy as well, that could allow home to be a perfectly good, safe, and therapeutic environment.
Thank you for that. I do want to be mindful of the clock. I will ask one more general question, which is what I asked of the previous panel, which is if we were to reimagine DYRS, where would you point us towards and where might we start? And I will ask any of you that question.
I'll say exactly what I just said, is I really think we need to be focusing on what's available in the community, and that would help us stop everyone feeling like we need to turn to secure detention as the answer, whether it's for their safety or for their rehabilitation, of which it's doing neither. Kids are also in great danger physically and mentally in detention. So I really think focusing on community, which requires us to collectively act, is not just on DYRS, but it is partially on DYRS to come up with this.
Thank you.
I can't help but echo Whitney's sentiments, but I would add that we heard from Director Abed that there were 3 groups that they were having trouble placing: girls, people who needed, children who needed foster care, and people who they believe need to be in a PRTF, a psychiatric residential treatment facility. And what we see in other states is that many people who would otherwise be sent to these more secure placements can thrive at home or in the therapeutic foster care setting, precisely because what they need is intensive services, and agencies tend to see someone who needs intensive services and instead think, danger, danger, we need to put them behind bars. And that doesn't really work. I'd also really love to see the agency adopting more of CFSA's policies around abscondances, because they do not negotiate when somebody's in abscondance, which they would do if they were a CFSA kid. And as Ms. Chungus can report, many of our children either are literally dual-jacketed and are both, or potentially have that sort of shared status.
Thank you. Ms. Chungus, I will give you the last word here.
And I think to your question, part of what we asked our group in our work group with JJAG is what is their vision for the future of supporting youth? And I think what we've heard similarly from Whitney and Josh is greater investment in community and community placement options for youth so that they aren't separated from their families and community in out-of-state placements, but also really engaging youth and families in these decisions that are being made. So it's not a top-down agency approach of where kids get placed, but understanding what are the actual needs of these kids and families, and how can they be best met.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm now going to turn to my colleague, Councilmember Bonds, for a 10-minute round.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to the witnesses, all of you who are here to talk about this important subject matter. You've given me one of the answers that I had. I was going to say, as we imagine the future and how we can improve everything, what do you see? And so thank you for that. And I made some notes. And so I want to ask just a few more questions about those areas. When a young person finds themselves in the system and they are detained, what kind of services can they get that you feel they must have in order to continue the next day, on to the next day?
I can answer some of those. I think education is a big one. Having access to in-person school, which they often don't have right now. Having access to robust physical exercise is good for both physical and mental health. That's also severely lacking right now. It's supposed to be every day. Right now, it's less than once a week, sometimes even monthly. Access to family. I think that would be not just family visits, but also family therapy and family counseling. And then the robust programming that both the past panel was talking about in terms of the kinds of programs that could fill that afternoon hour of structured programming instead of inactive time. But then also knowing what's happening, knowing why they're there, knowing where they're going next, understanding what the plan is and being part of that plan will help decrease anxiety and frustration.
Wow, I really appreciate hearing that. And what about, you have some you want to add?
I mean, everything that Ms. Lockheim said, but when we talk to youth, we often hear that they're still dreaming. So they, I was at YSC last night, and I was hearing that kids would really like to learn entrepreneurship, and like they really want to learn the nitty gritty of things like accounting or business development or credit and finance. We hear that kids are interested in making music. They're interested in having more opportunities to meet with their fellows, even inside of the Youth Services Center. So they're looking for opportunities to sort of cross units, which is often very difficult. But that's precisely because they're stuck in these very small spaces for a very long period of time. And that's so terrible for their mental health. And so getting out of the unit, being able to have, like a little competitive basketball game with the unit next door becomes so meaningful to them. But fundamentally, the things they need are the things.
Yeah. In other words, creating a neighborhood within the confines.
Yeah.
And when I say detain, I'm speaking of those who are waiting the disposition of the rest of their life. Not those that are committed. Okay, so you just gave a big laundry list of expectations for detainees. And some that I think the record shows have been detained for more than 6 months in some instance. Okay, I just want to understand that. And so, yes.
Can I say one thing? I don't think the needs change dramatically between detained, pre-trial or pre-sentencing and after. I do think that those things remain the same for those who are committed and awaiting their next placement as well.
So the picture I'm getting is that if you are in the system, that is, if you are considered at this point, you're arrested for something, and therefore in our system, that we should fashion a neighborhood concept by which you can continue to have a meaningful life as a young person. Okay.
Yes, and build that support that they can have on the outside as well.
All right. All right. That's a huge order because we, as you well know, we don't even have that in the regular communities where we live. But I agree with you. It makes all the sense in the world if we're going to help the young person to move to a better life or better quality of life. So in looking at that, do you see the staffing pattern at the agency complementary to what you think will really work for us to change the outcomes?
No, I would say right now, between too many kids being held and then the staff shortages at the same time clash to create a situation in which education can't even happen on the school oftentimes because of staff shortages, and that means they stay in their cells. They might get a packet. Teachers might be able to come and give education through the window in some cases, but that really is not even close. So I think between holding too many children and having staff issues, that creates a very rather impossible situation. But I would also defer to Mr. Jordan on the previous panel and the Public Defender Service for their expertise in this.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, the other thing we've heard from staff even is that they feel themselves undertrained, that there are culture issues, and they get lots of training on things like the policies and the procedures, but they don't feel like they know what to do in all the situations they find themselves in. They don't have the resources they need.
Okay, you all have said so much in just this one round of questions because I can see the vision the vision that if we can transform the lives of these young people, just think what we could do if we could do it outside of the confines in the community. So I don't know, I'm going to talk to the chairman and we're going to see what we can do to at least create as much of that. I mean, you mentioned exercise, access to family, and the opportunity for counseling, and then to dream your dreams and, maybe make Lego miniatures like what we have out in the hallway, at least something to grow on and something to latch on to have a future in order to have a good life. So the scope is huge. Absolutely. So we're not there yet. So what are the immediate steps that we need to focus on? I think you mentioned education first. So in your laundry list, so is the education piece maybe a place where we can start, or?
I would start on decreasing the number of youth who are detained, because that will allow all of those things to happen more smoothly. As Mr. Jordan said, when they're not overcrowded, things happen with higher quality and much more smoothly and regularly. That doesn't mean we can't dream bigger, but that's a baseline. I do think that between doing the assessments with fidelity, doing them on time, and not overriding the assessment when they can be seen that they could be in the community, that's a one place to start.
Okay, I know that you mentioned, Ms. Tondras, you mentioned the issue of getting the community to, well, I use community, but getting those who provide services to be responsive to the agency. Can you give me a little more on that so that I understand where the problem might be? Because, here at the council, we think our laws compel people to perform. And of course, we know it's not true, but we do like to think that that's what's going to happen. So what are some of the things that we can do to get the juices flowing and the cooperation so that the issue of our young people being detained is tantamount in the thinking of those that have the services that they may need?
Right. So I think, in the work group, there was this ask for greater investment in community placements and community resources to build greater options for where youth could be placed. And I think, this goes along with having conversations with youth and families about what placements should look like, is understanding if there are these placement options that are local. We heard that a lot of kids might not go against the placement that is out of state because they're so desperate to get placed somewhere. But if there were options available to them that are in DC, that might be a better fit for youth. And I think to your question earlier, I think what a lot of youth are missing is that stability. We've heard, they go from the community, they go to YSC, then they go to New Beginnings, then they have to make another plan. So every time they're transitioning, right, their peer groups are changing. They're not with their families. If they do have access to therapy, that therapist has to change. And so any way that we can create greater stability for kids in these transitions, I think needs to happen. And some of that is through increased access to having family visits as well.
Well, I appreciate that, but I'm really, when you say we need more community placements within the district, how does the government do that? I mean, the different services, education, access to counseling and family, should we try to create these entities? And with what resources? In other words, my concern is that we have what we have. And have we identified, as a government, have we identified all of the services that could be available? Is that the issue, that we haven't identified them as an example?
I mean, I could mention that we could spend a fraction of what we spend on holding youth in secure facilities to invest instead in in-home therapies and counselings and family support. It would really cost much, much less. And my colleague can also talk about Medicaid and how that plays into it, but I do think there are ways that the government can provide it and can invest in it and sometimes draw down federal funds to do so without requiring detention and that kind of.
I would really like to learn more about that, sincerely. You know that, Mr. Miller. I've known you for many years.
It's true. It's good to see you. I mean, so what we know is that there already are a lot of the services that Ms. Lockheim described in the community. We have schools, we have core service agencies, we have great parks. And when we take people out of the community, then we have to take all of these services that we've gotten pretty good at supplying to many people in the district, and we have to sort of project them into this locked facility with lots of issues around protecting against contraband. And that would not be as much of a problem if we could serve these children in their communities. And so I think, that's also where Medicaid is available. And so, it's a lot easier to provide all these things and to fund all these services when you don't have kids locked up. And, one thing that I think we are pretty consistent on is that locking kids up is just not good for them. It's not really good for public safety either.
I hear you about all of what we already have, and I appreciate that. And I guess I had a vision, just let me just finish this, a vision of if I'm locked up, so every day my counselor, quote unquote, we go out and we're going to have the activity, my activity plan will be implemented. Whether I go play basketball and course, school, dinner out, meeting some other kids who have lifted themselves from the system and are doing great things. And then I come back and I'm in bed. Is that kind of like how you're seeing it, that there would be a full array of activities for the person who would be incarcerated? Okay, and then to this issue of the counseling. It is my understanding we have a real deficit.
20 more seconds.
Yes, okay, deficit of counselors that are involved in our government and in our community. So what can we do? You mentioned Medicaid and maybe federal. Is there some way that we can speed that up?
In 5 seconds or less.
I'm so sorry.
We would be happy. Our written testimony contains some answers to these questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very
Absolutely.
much for your indulgence.
Thank you all for your testimony today. On our next panel, we will have Hamika Ball, Levon Williams, and I believe Eduardo Ferrer is not able to join us. If you could press the button so the red light comes on. Yep, and you
Good afternoon.
begin your testimony.
Good afternoon. My name is Shamika Duvall. I'm a director of Brothers Loving Our Community. I'm here to speak on about the youth. First, I want to give thanks to you all for having us here and allow us to speak on the opportunity of the youth. Our goal is to support, have treatment plans within 30 days of any youth committed to DYRS, Department of Health Rehabilitation Services, because our journey is through the system, begins with goal and mind treatment plan that isn't delay. We also believe a treatment plan will have to be wrapped around for youth in their custody under their supervision and community with service addressing chronic issues with mental health, substance abuse. Blocks Loving Our Community also believe family service play a major role in the solutions because most of everything starts within the home. Most of our youth we have in our community like support is at home under the care of DYRS. We believe it by leading with passion while approaching give better success of youth risk in our community by addressing hard-pressed issues of the youth crime. We know that in order to address these issues, we must speak about the home public safety, keep wraparound service for these youth, boys and girls with model that's more hands-on in approach.
Thank you. And then next we will have Lavon Williams.
Good afternoon. I want to start by thanking, members of the council for having us. As my colleague said, wraparound services needs to start in the home, because a lot of these children are coming out of them homes and their parents are suffering from, mental health crisis, drug abuse crisis. So there has to be something put in place where services are rendered to the families of these children. Also, services need to be put into the schools, because a lot of times we're seeing that services or programs are afforded to juveniles that once a crime is committed, they are now able to receive certain services or certain mentor groups. However, these groups and these services need to be afforded to children that are in these schools displaying abnormal behaviors before the crime is even committed. I work with children in the community, and it's obvious that, the road of a lot of these children, the road is Oak Hill, New Beginnings, because it's just because the behaviors that they're displaying in school and in the neighborhoods. And there should be people that can identify these issues with these children and see and foresee and try to, intervene in these children's lives, not at the point once a crime is committed. Also, I want to speak shortly about a lot of the complaints that I'm receiving from a lot of the children that we work with that are in, the confinements of New Beginnings or YSC. Just the mental health treatment that they are supposed to be receiving. I have children complaining that they have requested they were experiencing a mental health crisis, and they requested mental health attention, and they weren't afforded mental health attention until 2 to 3 days later. By this time, they already committed another act which set back their time in these placements. Another issue that a lot of children have been complaining, not complaining, they have spoken about, and it's concerning to us, is that we speak on allowing these children to have family communication, which is important. However, the family communication that these children are experiencing are causing more stress, anxiety, and depression upon these children, because we have parents, especially in single family homes, single mother homes, we have mothers putting their problems and their stresses, growing up, these children were the person that these mothers can confide in, right? So what's happening now is that these same mothers are, visiting their children and giving their children, venting to their children as, a mother would. However, it's putting more stress and causing depression and anxiety and frustration in these children. So, we would like to know, is it possible that something can be put in place to kind of, coach like a parenting class or something to coach these parents, and try to deter them from putting extra stresses on these children that are, in these placements, and let me see. One more thing I'd like to. And the last thing that I would like to speak about is the routine that's constantly being broken with these children. I have children complaining that once they're put in these placements, even after these placements, that it's a routine that they, build, they look forward to, right? And then, you know, for a lot of unknown reasons or reasons that weren't explained to them, the routine was abruptly broken, or and it caused. It caused a lot of frustration in these children, and a lot of them say that they started to act out. So we are asking that, will it be possible? Is it possible that a lot of these routines that you give these children aren't just broken, and you allow these children to have a consistent day, right, of these routines. One more thing is the children with, IEPs that have learning issues. These children are complaining because they are saying that, a lot of these placements are program based. Right. And with the overflowing, with the overcapacity of children, or even just with the teachers, the mental health physicians, I guess they are saying that these people have become overwhelmed and burnt out, for lack of better words, right? And with that, these children with learning, disabilities, they're saying that it's hard for them to complete the programs where frustration does come into place. And now frustration comes into place where they start to act out again.
I got it.
So, but those were mainly the concerns that,
Thank you for that.
All
And,
right.
and I'm gonna ask questions, and as will my colleague. I want to just make sure I got it right. Is it Kamika or Shamika? Shamika, and it's Ball.
Duvall, Shamika Duvall.
Duvall.
Yes.
Got it. Got it. I just want to make sure I address you by the right name. And are you all associated with an organization or as individuals?
Organization, Brothers Loving Our Community, I'm the director.
And that was Brothers Govern Our Community?
Brothers Loving Our Community.
I got it. Okay. I wanted to start with the discussion around wraparound services. And what I really appreciated that both of you all emphasize is that these services should start well before a young person is even engaged with DYRS, that we need them in the community. One thing I would just note there in the education space, there's discussion around community-based schools, more funding for community-based schools, which is a way of saying school communities that provide these wraparound services, from health needs to behavioral health to nutrition, et cetera, et cetera. What are some examples you might give for the wraparound services that the youth that you're encountering could benefit from, either after their engagement with DYRS or before?
So before they answer DYRS, we will offer community support work.
And what do you mean by that?
Community support work, because these youth out here, they need someone they could trust, they could talk to, someone they could come to for anything. Like he was saying, a lot of them have they don't learn, their learning process is not fast like other ones. So a lot of these kids act out in order to have some kind of attention on them if they don't have the learning part, if they have a learning delay. So, the community support, again, back to that, community support is when we support them and the needs and when they need help in.
I got you. And is that like mentorship? Or is that school-based programming?
It could be both. It could be both. And I say that because again, when you're talking to them and you're supporting them, you're mentoring them and you're helping them with education.
Mhm. I got it. Yep. You want to jump in?
The main demand with the children that we've been hearing and encountering is the fact that a lot of them, just want to try to figure out a way to make some money, right? So, maybe we can try incentive-based vocational training classes in a lot of these schools where, these children are now going back to gaining a trade or a vocational class, and they're receiving some type of stipend or some type of incentive, something for participating, to try to curve, that void of, not having financial.
That resonates completely. I'll say two things on that. So coincidentally, Councilmember Bonds and I co-sponsor legislation that would increase the pay of the youth leadership program, because we know a lot of young people are participating in that, and quite frankly, they're not getting paid enough. Because I see that program as an avenue to steer young people away from the streets, quote unquote, and/or doing things they shouldn't be doing. More importantly, though, I know a lot of our young people, to your point, need and want money.
Exactly.
And there is a whole range of reasons why barriers might exist for a young person being able to obtain long-term employment. And so this is an invitation. I would love to follow up after today's hearing to think about what a program like that might look like, whether that's an apprenticeship program. Yes, I know DOES and others have these programs, but I'm also of the mind that we need to meet our young people where they are. We know that some of these young people probably are not going to have the skill sets or even the mindsets that we may want them to ultimately achieve, but we have to meet them where they are to put them on that right path. So I will certainly follow up. And if you can just make sure, if we have your contact, we get it. But I wanted to come to some of the complaints you shared with the young people that you're engaged with, both around mental health treatment, which is something we heard from others. It is something that I've raised concerns about. I would love if you can elaborate on that, because it sounds like you're saying young people are complaining about delayed treatment, that they themselves are raising their hand saying, I would like to see someone, and someone is provided days later. Can you just share more about that?
So the young people have spoken and said that, they share with us, right, that, in confinement, YSC or New Beginnings, right, that it's a limited amount of staffing with the mental health, with mental health. So what happens is a young person, for example, might have got off the phone, had a bad phone call, right? Or dealing with the stresses of the streets, or, just being incarcerated so they will ask an officer, hey, I need to see mental health, right? And then the officer might just call mental health. However, mental health might push that person off because, they might have, been overwhelmed with mental health requests that day. And that young person wasn't afforded the mental health attention, that was supposed to have been afforded to them. And what happens is, they lash out, and then, that was one of the things that was shared to us. It was, but mainly just the overcapacitated, these centers being, so in high demand with children that have mental health history, whether, it's, shared mental health, something that came from the home, or, something that they were, born with,
And I will say, because it's my impression that you're in touch with young people who are currently incarcerated with DYRS. Is that right?
Yes, sir, yes.
So an invitation with this subcommittee, when you receive those complaints, you could put them in direct touch. You can follow up with us so that we can be in touch with that young person and or the agency.
Okay.
One last thing I wanted to follow up on in terms of like this preventative step. I know DYRS runs the OASIS program, which seeks to engage young people, namely middle schoolers at DCPS and now a growing number of charter schools. And we went and saw the OASIS facilities out near New Beginnings. In what ways might we want to expand that program or create other programs to reach more at-risk youth so that they never are encountering DYRS?
Truthfully, a lot of these programs, right, from the times that, Oak Hill, DYRS and all this even came about. A lot of these programs, they have the perfect model, right? They know what to say, but it's consistency with these kids, and that's what we're not seeing.
And for me, not to interrupt, sorry, the OASIS program has proven to be successful, but I think they're only reaching or have reached 100 and some odd young people.
Right.
And so while it's great, or maybe they do a smaller cohort per year, they're not reaching nearly as many youth that are at risk. And so one of the things I'm interested in is how do we scale that program? But it also seems like you're suggesting more consistency and outreach to young people is needed.
Yeah, well, see, with the OASIS program, just like you said, with the limited amount, of people that are there and that they're able to reach, right? It's just, finding, I guess, the funding to be able to make it more broad, and reach a bigger majority of people.
And then in my last 38 seconds, a little bit more about your organization, and then I'm going to turn to my colleague, Councilmember Bond. So Brothers Loving Our Community, are you all registered with the city? Are you receiving support from the city to do work with young people?
No, actually, we've been coming out of our own pockets doing everything. We recently had an event in September up Simple City, and it was just, giving back to the community, bringing the community together. Also, we're working with 2 neighborhoods that's steady in conflict with each other. We got each ringleader from each one, and we've been combining them together, doing work with them.
What are those 2 communities?
Bennett Terrace and Bennett Park.
Got it. I would be interested in following up to just see and learn more about your work and if there are opportunities to collaborate. But I want to thank you all for coming to testify.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn to Councilmember Bonds.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both so very much. I think you add the juice to the salad, so to speak. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As it relates to your program, I too would like to know much more about it. And I'd like to know, well, first, let's start with, are you currently receiving any help from the city, maybe like with the grants that we give for community-based programming?
No, we haven't received no grants, but we did have someone from another organization named Fat Cat. He did come along and he did help us, support us in getting what we needed to have the new initiative given back to the cookout that we had in September. But other than that, everything else that we've been doing, we've been coming out of our own pocket. Again, like I was telling him, the 2 communities that are at conflicts, we dealing with each one. And we take one from this side, one from that side, we bring them together. So we did do a couple of things with them, like feed the homeless. We did a co-event, and we have more things that we're coming up with to bring them together to stop the conflict.
I appreciate hearing about that. I grew up in a neighborhood nearby, up a little further up Benning Road, okay? So that's home place for me. And anything that you are doing there, I know has to be a good thing for the people there. So thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I would like to add on to that. I'm a social media influencer also, as well as, and I'm also a returning citizen, right? So I have been in collaboration and done volunteer work with other community-based at-risk youth work. Violence interrupted groups such as Cure the Streets Knock, and they have given a substantial amount of money to like a lot of the giveaways and the fun, a lot of the youth. Just recently, they gave us tickets to take some of the youth to a Wizards and Detroit Pistons game. And actually they gave us the tickets and they gave us the mayor's suite also, so, we are in collaboration with, a lot of other violence
Yeah.
interrupted groups.
And I think that's really great. And Councilmember Parker and I, we also get a couple of tickets and
Yeah.
we're happy to share.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank
Okay, you just have to ask.
you. Yeah, thank
And
you.
they're there, okay, because we don't know how else to use them, do we? Okay, all right.
So,
Absolute commitment. What I'm really trying to get to is to understand, some of the points that you have made that are really glaring, and that is how we as community can assist young people with just feeling stable where they are and knowing they have someone to talk to on a regular basis. And so what can we do about that? Or do you feel that you have identified a number of people who provide that stability for the kids in the communities that you're working with?
So I'm gonna speak on that. He could speak also. Again, I'm gonna go back to helping the youth, someone they could trust. So we do provide transportation to some youth. Like now we have youth calling every day. We get up, we take them to school. They might call, they want to talk to them. We check on their grades. We follow up with them in school. We get permission from the parents. So again, it's about finding ways to meet to see why they're not going to school. If they want to go to school, they need transportation. We take them.
Okay. And how many are young people are participants in your program?
We have quite few, so we rotate.
Okay.
We
Are we
rotate.
talking 10,
well,
50, 100?
We have about like 10 now.
Okay.
We're getting more. It's a process. So you see one child doing it and they be like, oh, what you doing? They get excited and the next one comes. So, it's a process and the steps to doing it. But we probably have like 10. We're still building. We're new to this, but we're still building.
Okay. So I don't want to start a revolution, but
Mhm.
if you had a little minivan, you could pick up maybe a dozen.
Yeah.
And if you had a bus, you could pick up 40, 45.
Yes.
You think that that's?
Yes,
a
and
level
that's
of
our
need?
goal. That's
Okay,
our
I'm just
goal.
trying to get a sense.
We just
of-
need
yeah.
funding to do things like that because it is kids out here that do want to go to school. But again, we can't put everybody in one car and majority of them go to the same school. And when you take the first load, when you come back, the second load might don't be there because it's just like, they all want to go together or, you got one that might look up to the next one. So if we be there to support them and we get to have you said like a bus or a van or something like that to get them there, then we could do that. But right now we doing as much as we can and we do take them to school, pick them up.
And do you take them to school because they fear trying to navigate the streets to
The
get to
streets,
school?
yes, we do deal with
Okay.
that a lot.
I see.
well,
Mr. Williams, you want to add?
I'm sorry, didn't want to disrupt.
No.
Well, it's funny that you asked that, right? That because one of my youth, right? Well, mind you, I'm a social media advocate for youth, right? So I do majority of my, majority of my youth come through social media. When we do the giveaways, I go through social media, and that's what brings a lot of the youth and a lot of the families out, right? Because I have a pretty substantial following, right? But one of the youths, he said to me one day, he said, "All right, man, he said, man, how I know that you're a real one? I'm tired of being lied to, right?" I say, man, I guess you got to take my word for it. Now, this is in the beginning, right? So he said, I had enough of being lied to when I found out that Santa Claus wasn't real. Blew me away. So from that young age, he was fed up with being lied to. And then that's what a lot of these children do. They sit with these nonprofits or even, these mentors, these groups, and they go into them, they go into it with the preconceived notion that, okay, they're just chasing the check. They are just, they're just here. It's not going to be 24 hours of somebody that really cares for me, right? This is a job to them. And this is where, my reputation, our reputation with this has started to perceive us, with, the youth is in that word of mouth started to travel amongst the youth. It's because we're 24 hours. If a youth at 12 o'clock at night is struggling with, the unfortunate event of taking a life, or just needing somebody to talk to, that voice to deter him, or that reasoning to talk him off of that ledge, we're available. You see, and that's what a lot of these youth now. This is where the love and the reputation with us comes in that, because now they're saying that they really care, they're really there, and that's something that's missing in these communities. Because once they're off the clock, it's over with. You don't call me, I won't figure out how to get in contact with you. And that's where a lot of these children have built up that notion, or build up that callousness towards a lot of these groups and a lot of these mentors and a lot of these people, because, and they might not say it, but they feel it, they see it. They see the inconsistencies, but that just goes towards, what she was saying, with everything that she was saying and everything that we do and everything that we're trying to do, is that the fact that, these children know that we're really there.
I hear you. And I appreciate that, and would really love to have a little more extensive conversation with you about that. As you were talking, I was thinking that one of the things we need, and this is an idea, and I'm sure someone will steal it before I can put it together, but we need a community builder award, very much like I think it's the MacArthur Award, where folk who really are into community and work with community and can actually show that they're changing lives, that it makes a difference. But I didn't get a chance to talk to you about what you do with the young people that you visit that are detained, because that too is very important, because that's what we're here for today. But you're trying to help us understand how to keep them out of the detainment situation, and we really appreciate that. So thank you, and I'm not going to take many minutes. Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm
Absolutely.
respectful of.
Thank you all. This is great. And as I mentioned, I would love to follow up with you to stay in touch, to both see how we can learn from your experience, but also collaborate on some of the next steps that we discussed. So with that, I believe that concludes all of our witnesses today. I would just say some of the takeaways for me from Monday's roundtable with the director to today's hearing, I have also visited both YSC and New Beginnings, and our oversight will be ongoing. But it's clear that we need to align as a government on what is success for DYRS. And what is clear to me is that there are many different ways that people are thinking about this, from recidivism to success after placement, although many of those indicators are not being measured. So one takeaway I have is around how do we both align on what success looks like and making sure we're measuring the indicators that lead to that. Secondly, there's a clear concern I have around services being provided, and there's a discrepancy in services being rendered at New Beginnings and other placements versus YSC. And we're going to have to continue to circle back there. What I heard today is what I've been hearing is that services are not as robust at YSC and are not always consistent. But when I talk with the director, we are led to believe that services are happening for all young people detained in DYRS. And I just have a reason to believe that that is not the case. Placements, both in terms of the process to determine a placement for a young person, but also the time in which it takes to place a young person is a key concern, especially this idea that we have young people sitting at YSC for months on end, knowing they're not receiving services, and it's unethical, and I think it's illegal. And so I will be laser focused on not only how do we speed up that process, but how do we ensure that there is fidelity in the process? We heard testimony today, for instance, the YLS is not being administered with fidelity. And the last thing I would just say is the delay in young people being discharged from DYRS, and what is the process that one goes through when their time is completed at New Beginnings or elsewhere. And so I just named, these are some of the areas I will be following up on after today's hearing. We will be sharing much more information, but I want to thank everyone that testified today, and I invite you, if you had not already submitted your testimony, to formally do so that we as a committee can formally follow up. The time is now 1:49 p.m. and I am going to call this hearing adjourned. Thank you.